Okay, welcome to today's webinar, New Batch Features in FCS Express 6. This will actually be a very short webinar. I would say it's probably going to be a little under half an hour. So we won't be taking up the whole hour because we're just going to be going over a few things. So we do have recorded webinars online about batch processing in general, and we'll probably do that general batch processing webinar again sometime this year, I would expect. So, if you have questions about that, you can feel free to ask, and we'll be able to point you in the right direction, probably offline. But today, what we're really going to talk about is the new batch features in FCS Express 6, and I have a little screenshot of it here on the left side of the layout, where I'm moving my cursor around. So what these features allow you to do is to compress your results, whether you're batch exporting to PowerPoint or PDF or even just printing out pages on your printer as a hard copy. It allows you to compress those results onto fewer pages or fewer PowerPoint slides. Okay, so we're going to be going over how to use those features, or that new functionality rather, in FCS Express. And again, for those of you who are just logging on, just feel free to enter in your questions in the questions and answer box. So in a little bit more detail, like I said, FCS Express can now compress your batch process outputs onto fewer PowerPoint slides, PDF pages, or pages printed to your printer. And so what we're going to be doing today is just looking at one layout as an example. We're keeping it really simple. We're just going to take a 3-page layout that has several files in the data list to batch process or iterate through. And the first thing we'll be doing is we'll be batch processing the entire layout to fewer PowerPoint slides. And we're just using PowerPoint as an example throughout this webinar. The procedures are exactly the same for PDF and for printing out to your printer. And there's a couple of different ways you can compress the results onto fewer slides. That's with a number of preset modes, like you can perhaps see here in this screenshot right here. We have some preset modes here. Probably reminds you of handouts from PowerPoint. You can print out little snapshots of the slides on the left with notes, lines for notes on the right, or just a grid of PowerPoint slides. It's very, very similar, the options now in FCS Express. Okay. And then the other way to compress the results onto fewer slides is using the custom grid, which is accessible through another part of this menu. Then we're going to show those same options, the preset modes or the custom grid, when we're batch processing selected pages of our layouts. So that's useful when you have just maybe 1 or 2 pages of a multi-page layout, and those are the pages you're interested in. So it could be that you have a bunch of plots on the first few pages, and those are just used for getting the statistics that you need, or maybe doing some QC, but you have a summary page at the end, or maybe like a few interesting plots with rare events or other events of interest, and those are what you really want to process out to your PowerPoint or PDF or your printer. So that's what we'll show you how to do in the second part, batch processing selected pages of your layouts. And then I'm just going to show you where you can find the same options that I've just gone through, or that I will have just gone through, in your PDF or your printed page options. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started without further ado. So the first thing I want to do is just introduce you to this layout. It is a 3-page layout. You can see the page tabs here at the bottom. Okay, we have 3 pages. So this is our first page where maybe I'll zoom in a little. The details are really not so important, but just to give you an idea of the things you can do. So we have a few different plots here. These are all showing the first file. This is a very simple batch process where we have one file corresponding to one iteration. So in the batch process, it will step forward. So if I were to preview it on the data tab, if I go next, this is going to be showing file 2. Okay, you can see the light blue highlights here in the data list on the right. I move that up to the bottom, move it up to the top right, so you'll see what I'm talking about with the data list. For some of you who might not be as familiar with the batch processing basics. But you see I step forward and my layout is going from file to file. And that's essentially what the batch process does in an automated fashion, right? It's going to spit out all these results into your PowerPoint or PDF or printed page or Excel, as the case may be. Okay, as you know, or some of you know, batch processes can be set up for any layout, no matter how complex. So even if you had multiple files corresponding to one iteration, for example, if you're using panels, all of the options I'm going to show you today certainly do apply. But today we're just sticking with a simple example where we have one file per iteration. Okay, so this is the most simple batch process. So we have a couple of plots. 2D plots at the top, and then a histogram overlaying a couple of gates from that same file. And then at the bottom, we have a statistics window. And if I go to page 2, we have a spreadsheet that is summarizing the results of all the files for a specific gate. And then if I go to page 3, I just have a plot of CD45 versus side scatter. Okay, so let's see how we can batch process this entire layout using these new batch processing features. And then we'll go back and do the same thing just for one of the selected pages of this layout. Okay? All right, so we're going to open up our batch processing window. And again, these are the things that are going to be covered in more detail in the general batch processing webinar. So hopefully some of you are, or most of you are already familiar with the basics here. But we'll come up here to the batch actions. Okay, and maybe I will actually tuck my data list down inside here as well, so everything's out of the way. All right, so like I said, we're just going to use PowerPoint as an example today. So I will click on my PowerPoint. Whoops. Okay, so let's just check off that we want to open it automatically. The first thing I want to point out is when you're doing these options that I'm going to show you today, where you're going to use these preset modes or custom grid, the first thing you want to do is come down here and check off this option right here, where it says combine the output from all iterations into a single file without page break. And so without getting into too much detail of what that really means, you just want to check that off when you're using those modes, or you're not going to have the expected result. Okay, so most of this is the same as what you're already used to. We're going to come down here and set up a file name and a file save path. So I'll put it in here, and actually let's put it in a new folder. Okay, so we can call this just result. And now let's come and take a look at the modes that we have available to us. So, well, actually, first, let's talk about how many iterations we have. So if you look at my data list in the bottom left, we have 9 iterations. So we're going to be exporting these 3 pages in our layout, right? Pages 1, 2, 3 at the bottom. I'll just come back in here. So 1, 2, 3. We have 3 pages. And then we have these 9 files in the data list. Okay, so ultimately, if we were to do a normal batch process, we would actually have 27 slides. In fact, why don't we do that first, just for comparison? We'll just do a regular batch process. And I will call this regular batch. Okay, and so I'm not going to play with any of these modes now. I'm just leaving it on the default full page. So this is what you're already used to doing. So if I click run, we should see that PowerPoint popping up in just a few moments. So this is our PowerPoint presentation, and we have 27 slides. You can see when I scroll down to the bottom, and every slide just corresponds on a one-to-one basis with a page from the layout. So for instance, these 3 slides are the pages 1 through 3 of the layout for the first file, right? You can see drug 1 here. Maybe I'll zoom in just a bit so you can see. And then the next 3 slides, 4, 5, and 6, they're corresponding to the second file, and so on and so on. Okay, so that's something we're already accustomed to. I will close that. Let's come in here and we will change this to a preset mode. Okay, so I'll just call this preset mode. And since I have 9 files in my data list, since that's a multiple of 3, I think it might be nice. Everything will fit nicely on a defined number of pages without anything spilling over onto any other pages. If I choose here 3 pages with notes, I mean, you can choose whatever you want, but let's just illustrate that. So 3 pages with notes, if you think to PowerPoint options, they have these options for printing out the PowerPoint slides as handouts. And this is similar to that, where you would have the 3 slides on the left, probably, and then on the right-hand side, you'll have some space to make notes, okay? So it's like something you can hand out to people if you're presenting your work to them and you want them to be able to take notes besides snapshots of the slides. So we will choose 3 pages with notes. I generally suggest that people select crop to content here, just because what that does is it's going to get rid of any excess white space. So if you have, for instance, like on page 3, we only had the one little plot by itself, you don't necessarily need to represent all that plain white space from the page in your PowerPoint export. So crop to content will just crop out that white space, and so the plot that you're interested in will actually be bigger in the export. So I usually just suggest to people to check that by default. Okay, and again, whenever you're doing these preset modes or custom grid, you want to select under iteration options here to combine all the iterations into a single file without page break. So now I can click OK, and let's click run and see the difference when that comes out. So this is our results. So we only have 9 slides because we had the 3 pages from the layout compressed onto 1 slide, and we have 9 of them because we had 9 iterations or 9 data files in our data list. Okay, so maybe if I show you the slideshow, you can see a little bit more detail. Or if I just probably zoom in, it'll be easier for you to see. Okay, so we have pages 1, 2, and 3 from the layout on each slide for each of the exports. Okay, let's take a look at another option here. So rather than using these preset options, and by the way, you'll see a number of other options in here, like horizontal, vertical. That just refers to the order in which the exports are printed onto the slide or the PDF or the printed page. So horizontal means going across in a row, you'll have file 1, 2, 3, and then the second row will be 4, 5, 6. Whereas vertical means you're going to go down in a column, file 1, 2, 3 in column 1, and then go across to column 2, and then that's going to be 4, 5, 6. So we'll see these options again when we choose custom grid. So I'm going to come in here to custom grid. And what that allows you to do is, rather than being restricted to these preset modes, custom grid lets you define the columns and rows that you want this to be exported into. So you can select custom grid and then click on this ellipsis to get the options to come up. And you can choose any number of columns and rows that you want. So I'm going to choose 3 by 3. And again, this is the order that I mentioned. So I'm going to leave this on horizontal. So I have the pages from the layout going across and then down. Gap mode, I usually put this on minimal. There's not really always a huge difference between these, but if you put it on minimal, it will minimize the amount of space between columns and rows. And frame page, we can leave that unchecked. All that does is it draws a line around each page from the layout. Okay, we'll use that again later when we try one of the other options, when we're just doing part of the layout as an export. So let's call this custom grid mode. Okay, and I think we are ready. Remember, if there's any questions, you can feel free to enter them into the questions and answer box. I noticed a few people came into the webinar a little bit later. So here on the lower right-hand corner of my layout, you should have a GoToWebinar console on your screen. And where it says enter a question for staff, you can type in a question and either I will get back to you during the course of the webinar or my colleague, Andrea Valle, will be able to get back to you during the chat as well. Okay, sorry to get off track there, but we are about to print out this custom grid, and so we'll click Run under the Batch tab again. And remember, whenever you're doing a batch process, you always want to start with the first file in your data list showing on your layout if you want to have the full complement of files coming out. Okay, so I think this will be nice if I show it to you as an actual slideshow. Okay, so this is the first slide. Hopefully you can all see this. So in the first slide, we have in the first row, the exports from the first file in our data list. So that's file number 1. It has the drug 1 keyword here. You can see it on the right. And these correspond to pages 1, and then 2, and then 3 going across in a row. And then again, we have pages 1, 2, and 3 for drug 2, and then 1, 2, and 3 for drug 3. And we can go to the next slide in our PowerPoint presentation. We have 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9. Okay, so I think you can see how this is going to help you not only save paper, but just it's nice to have your results more visually compressed sometimes if you want to just quickly see an overview of multiple files at once in your exports. Okay, so that is those are a couple of examples of how to use these new batch processing functions to visually compress the results from an entire layout. Let's show you how we can also do a partial layout. And just so you know, when you're experimenting around, you don't need to get rid of these old PowerPoint actions you've set up. You can just create a new one. You can have multiple ones in your layout. So let's put a new one, and I will save this in the same location, but we'll call it partial layout. Okay. And let's just do page 1 to start off with. So again, we want to always, when we're doing these custom grids or preset modes, you want to select this last option right here. And I'm so sorry, but my drawing tools are not working. So, oh, they're working occasionally. So you always want to select this option when you are doing the custom grids or the preset modes. So we are going to just do the current page, which is page 1 right now. So let's say that's the page we're interested in. And let's check off frame page this time so you can see what that looks like. We will choose, let's do 3 pages, or maybe we could do 4 pages actually. Doesn't really matter. We can do 3 pages of notes. That's what we did before. So we'll crop to content, and let's call this 3 pages with notes. And we'll click Run. Okay, so you can see that this draws a little frame around the page, and we have the room for the notes again. Okay, so I think you get the idea here. Let me just show you some other varieties of things you can do. Why don't we come in here and do custom grid? And we will do 3 by 3. And you don't have to choose a number of rows and columns that ends up being a multiple of the number of files you have in the data list, because if you have extra rows and columns or not enough, they'll just spill over into the next page. So don't feel like you need to do any arithmetic here, but I'm just choosing 3 by 3 because it happens to work so simply for our case. I'm going to make the gap mode minimal again. For variety, why don't we do it vertical this time? So you'll see that it's going to fill the files in a vertical order. So first down, then across. So we'll call this page 1 custom grid. And hang on with me one more time. Hang on with me for one more time, rather, while we wait for these batch processes to get written. Okay, so this is a really nice example because you can see that everything fits very nicely on one slide. So you've effectively summarized your page of interest on just one slide. So it's easy to just print that out and put it in your lab notebook or whatever you need. And in this case, like I showed you, we did the vertical option, so it's going down then across. So let me zoom in so you can actually see some file names and such. Okay, so here at the top we have drug 1, which corresponds to file 1, and you see the black line going around, which is the frame around the page. If I go down to the next row, we have drug 2 and drug 3, and then come back to the top, and now it's started doing drug 4 right here. Oops. Drug 5, drug 6, and so on. Okay, are there any questions about how that works? Just to prove to you that you don't need to choose an option that matches up perfectly with the number of files. You can change the number of columns and rows. They don't have to be the same. You can do 4 by 3, 4 by 2, whatever you want. So let's call this 4 by 3. Okay, so in that case, you have there's space for a 4th column because that's what we set up. And if you had done 2 by 2, you would have multiple slides because not everything would fit on one slide. So it doesn't need to match up perfectly. It can be whatever you want it to be. So excuse me, let's do one more example before we wrap things up. We did the page 1 of the partial layout. Let's do page 3 because page 3 is very different. You only have one plot, and let's see how that looks. So I will put in a new one here. So I'll just call this page 1 partial layout. And why don't we just do a custom grid for now? Okay, again, so let's choose the correct iteration option. Under iteration option, we want the 3rd one whenever we're using these options. And we will do custom grid. And let's do 3x3. Okay, now watch what happens. I'm intentionally not going to select crop to content this time. I'm leaving it unchecked. And let's see how that result looks, especially in a case like this where we have so much white space on this page. By the way, if you have multiple PowerPoints here, you can rename them so you don't get confused. So I'll just probably call this page 1 partial layout. Simply by right-clicking and hitting rename, or if you're on a PC, F2. Okay, so we don't actually need these. Let's just regenerate this one here. Probably should go a little faster in that case. Maybe I checked the wrong one. Hang on oh, I probably just didn't open it by default. Okay, I forgot to open it automatically. That's all right. We'll just find it in here. And I believe it's right here, partial layout. There we go. Oh, whoops, I'm sorry. I actually forgot to select the correct option to only do that page, page 3. So let's come back in here and you can just type in a page number here, or if you're actually on page 3, you could just select current page. So bear with me here. A little bit of a real world example of just coming in and double checking your options. Okay, that's what I expected. It's very quick because it's just doing one plot on one page. And so you have the 9 files, the exports from the 9 files all here on one slide, but of course you have a whole lot of extra white space because it's exporting the whole page from the layout, which is, if I zoom out here, you can see most of the page is actually white space, right? So what we want to do is crop to content. And like I said, you can usually just leave that checked. I would suggest checking it by default. If in doubt, just check it. So now when I check this, I'll give it a new name actually so we can differentiate. Crop. I'll click run and you'll see that the result will be much more useful. But sometimes you might not want to crop to content if you want to leave some extra room for putting in other things in your PowerPoint slides or writing notes and things like that. Okay, so here you see that this cropped out most of that white space, just left. There's of course always going to be a little space because the columns and rows are spaced out on the whole area of the slide. So unless you're batch processing quite a lot of iterations and they're jammed up into one slide, you're always going to have some space between the rows and columns. That's just natural, but it's cropped out the extra white space from the layout page itself. Okay, so do you have any questions? While I'm waiting to see if there's any questions, I'm just gonna, for fun here, show you that you can do another custom grid with a different number of rows and columns. So this time I'll do maybe 2 by 3, and you'll see that it's going to basically fill more than one slide because we have too many iterations. So 2 by 3 is just 6 iterations. So we're basically going to have 1.5 slides of output. So, but it's the same thing that you've seen before. But if you do have any questions, I'll be staying on the line for a few moments to see if I can answer those, or to see if Andrea can field any of those questions as well. And here's our last export that we've done together. Let's take a look at that. Oops, did that not go? Let's check again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we have 1.5 slides. So here's the first slide and here's the second slide. Okay, so just coming back to our summary of the webinar to review, we went over how to compress The batch processing outputs onto fewer PowerPoint slides, PDF pages, or pages printed to your printer. And just to show you that those are in the same place here, if you click on PDF, the options are going to look exactly the same. You also will be wanting to check out this last iteration option here. And if you're printing out hard copies to your actual paper printer, again, those options are there in the same place. So once you've learned one, you've learned them all. Okay, and again, the iteration options are down here. And we went over how to use these functions to batch process your entire layout using either the preset modes, such as 3 pages with notes or other varieties there that are in the drop-down menu, or custom grid. And then we did the same thing for batch processing selected pages of our layouts. And lastly, I showed you that those options are available for PDF and printed pages as well. So thank you so much for your attention and for joining us this afternoon or morning or evening, as the case may be. I know we have some attendees in Europe as well. And we hope that you'll try these out with your layouts on your own. And if you do have any issues, you run into any hiccups, just feel free to write to us. We're really happy to hear from you at support@denovosoftware.com. Our response is guaranteed within 24 business hours, but it's usually much quicker, within a few hours. And we'll be happy to help you either by email or by setting up a screen share where we can help you troubleshoot your layout live on a GoToMeeting. Okay, once again, if there's no questions, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. I do see there is one question. Is there an ideal number of batch process actions? Oh, I see that Andrea already answered that. Okay, well, if you are running into some issues, just let us know what the problem was, and I'm sure we can help you troubleshoot that on a meeting. Are there any other questions? We'll be keeping the webinar open for another minute or two, so don't be shy to enter those in.